The analyst wants to decrease the time between when the fire alarm goes off and when the student gets up to line up with the class. The best dimension to measure is A, rate, B, duration, C, count, or D, latency. So the analyst wants to decrease the time between when the fire alarm goes off and when the student gets up to line up with the class. The best dimension to measure is, and we have four options: rate, duration, count, or latency. So the correct answer is D, latency. So latency is appropriate to measure because latency is when we give a stimulus and then we time how long it takes between the presentation of the stimulus and the onset of the behavior. So this is a measure of the elapsed time between the onset of a stimulus and the initiation of the response. So typically we report this by mean, median, or a range of individual latencies measured per observation period. So a lot of times students get response latency and interresponse time confused. So interresponse time is the amount of time that elapses between two consecutive instances of a response class. And in interresponse time, the higher the frequency, the smaller the interresponse time we're going to have. Because of course, if there's less space between each response, there are of course going to be more responses. With response latency, we're offering an SD, or the world is offering an SD, and then we are timing the time between when the SD is given and when the response is initiated. So looking back at our question, we have to figure out what is it asking me and how should I answer it. We have to first find what happened. So in our story, we see that we want to decrease the time. So already we know that this is a dimension that we're likely going to want to decrease. And then it tells us when the fire alarm goes off, that's our SD, by the way, and when the student gets up to line up with the class. So we have something happening and then a response. And so automatically we know if we're interested in the time between an SD and a response, then we're talking about latency. Otherwise, we would say between one response and the next response, if we were talking about interresponse time, between the beginning of the response and the end of the response, if we were talking about duration. So all of these dimensions, these are some of those things that we essentially just have to memorize.